did. What this would say then to a teacher, kick the lights back on for me. A teacher would say, would get a summary of which students had problems with what at the word level or at the representation level as it's placed into the content. Now that same summary goes to whoever's responsible for the evolution of this. So if there was somebody who was the curriculum person responsible for this area of the curriculum, they would also get informed by this. Now when a student creates the material, there's many different ways that we could talk about how is it that we ensure the quality of that material. There are corporations that are already coming into existence. One of them is Intellimation in Santa Barbara. Their whole reason for being is to make contact with educators and get the material that education in the site-based view of the world are developing, pick it up at a certain level, screen it for quality, and redistribute it to other education sites. So there are companies that are coming into business to do nothing but that. But frankly, my preference is that another level of learners is the screen for another level of learners. That ultimately, the way that I hope this technology works, and that's the reason that, in my mind, this technology just needs to go into education and evolve. It's a learning system itself, such that what I'm proposing is that a professional authoring team or teachers themselves would create what I might call a seed crystal, if you're familiar with the idea of a seed crystal. Right? It would be a starting piece of content, the central thread and some references, and they'd put it out there. And then students would be charged initially with, well, we've got just the central thread on this part of history, so you can use this, and then go into the regular library and do research, and I would like to charge the class with doing the key points. That's going to be the class's assignment this week, to do the key points. Their output report feeds back to the system so that now the key points are available for the next generation. And the system is a growing system. It doesn't, ultimately, it becomes very, very economical because there's nobody who's controlling all the intellectual property. It's student created for student consumption and edited by corporations if needed and students if possible. So that what we're talking about here is a transceiver, if you will, a transmit and receive interface system, and not a system that requires all of the authors and publishers of the world to get involved. Not that they're not interested, because if you go talk to them, one of the things that they're excited about right now is the idea that instead of having to buy a CD-ROM with an encyclopedia on it, that they could sell, which requires somebody to have a CD-ROM player and all the rest of it just to be able to get at the encyclopedia. Well, I mean, that's a real problem. If you're reading something on a computer screen and then you've got to get the dictionary out or the encyclopedia out, put it in the CD-ROM drive and boot it up and then get it online and all that kind of stuff. The problem of a learner is that they may need an encyclopedia, but they need it right where it occurred. Right? So what we're saying is that we're going to talk about an entirely different intellectual property paradigm, an entirely different way of distributing resources. Rather than having to buy the whole entire encyclopedia, somebody may only need 100 entries out of the encyclopedia for this course. So they buy the 100 entries and they're built into the way that this material works. So it's got a different economic paradigm altogether underneath it, which we think is part of its viability.
This is a good point to add too about what our grant has built into the process, is that we would develop the curriculum and the resources together, and we built in the money, bring teachers together and curriculum designers that help us develop those interfaces. So you've been working on the prototypes, learning the systems approach. So we built that into our grant, that we in Cobb County would be part of that along with North Carolina people. And then we'd buy those resources that are important, as David was talking about. So if we get our grant is established, that process is, if and when, then the process is that you would help us evolve the product and actually do and be paid for doing it.
We're developing a matrix of partners. Some of them in Canada, some are in Hawaii, some in California, some in Washington, some right here, some in North Carolina. And our intention is not to try to build some new system that you guys got to catch. Here it is. Take it and use it. But rather How can we evolve what we've been talking about? A mutually learning-oriented relationship. How can you become co-designers in this?
It would seem to me we need a matrix of partners within the school and within the school district.
Precisely.
Some of the roles that the teachers have now and the teacher assistants have and the lead teachers and the teams would have different roles because, now see if I'm wrong, at the end of that day or sometime during that day, not at the end of the day, but at the end of that learning experience, the team would need to come together to see what has been produced, what is the quality of what has been introduced, and how do we make assessments of where the students, what kinds of information the students will need, say, the next day.
Right.
It's, in the old days, we would just stack up the papers, put them in a suitcase, take them home, and grade them. Now it seems like you'd have to do something with what's being created during that day. How does that work? How do you work with what's been created during that day?
Well, in terms of the resources that have been added into the student or school memory resources, those don't necessarily have to be dealt with on an everyday basis. What has to be dealt with on an everyday basis is some kind of summarization and visualization of where people had trouble, so that the next day, if we find out, for example, that the students really had a problem with this particular concept and this issue, this approach to representation, then the teacher has an awareness of that to work with, to work from, which is different. It's a different kind of problem. But I mean, if we had more time, and we don't, we've got 9 minutes left, we could talk about the teacher interface. And the idea is that not only do we want to create a learner interface so that a learner can do all this, we want to create a teacher interface, and a principal interface, and a school interface, and a district interface, and a state superintendent interface, right? And a global interface, so that this whole system can take the information that's flowing in it and visualize, do various types of visualizations so that people can see what's really significant and what's necessary to adjusting the course of a classroom or a body of students. I mean, your questions are really helpful, and I'm going to invite you to come to our one-day workshop.
The other thing that we have to think about is that once you buy into these kind of different thought processes, start restructuring what it is we're all about, raises the question across the board about everything we've ever done with schooling. Time, course content, subjects, everything tied to bell curve syndrome, outcome-based, standards, testing. And unless the profession itself gets up in the top echelons of making those decisions and making it happen in this decade, we will not even be in the picture in the 21st century. And you know that as well as I do. So that's part of what we would evolve is, how are we going to do this? You had a question, Mark.
Yeah, David, when you first started out, I felt like you could take this system home with you as parents. And now, as we go through, I get the feeling if it's a system we're building, that's really not what I'm...
It's not a software product that's on the market right now, no question.
But I even see it as you're building it, since it's not something that's tangible, you can touch it and go get it. My question is, how do we get this same type of information and stuff in the home, which I view as a place to enhance and build on what's done in school?
Okay, let me...
It will go home.
Yeah, it will go home. Let me, in the remaining 6 minutes, let me address this question because it's really fundamental. The marketing strategy for Learning Insights. There's 3 companies involved here. Hang on, Louis. Learners Unlimited, which concerns itself with working with educators, with students, with teachers, okay, with administrators, to figure out how to bring this into the world. Diacom deals with the organizational, systemic problems of education, and Learning Insights deals with what I've shown you now, this interface between a learner and information. Now, with respect to marketing this, we intend it to be a not-for-profit throughout education throughout this country.